Hello everybody, good afternoon, and welcome to a special edition of DCBS TV live stream. Our session today is called Mastering Storyboards, and we actually have a special guest here with us today, Dan Antkowiak, and he's been a storyboard artist here in Orlando, Miami, Los Angeles for the last 15 years, working on commercials, music videos, and all other kinds of productions. So welcome, Dan.
Thank you very much.
How are you doing today?
Excellent.
Yay.
Lee.
Excellently.
Thanks. Sure.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's just jump right into it. So tell me a little bit, let's start at the very beginning, the very, very basics of storyboards. What is a storyboard?
All right. Storyboard is a physical item, a picture, an image, a photograph that is a representation of the director's ideas of what to do with the script. The scripts all look the same. You know, every script is, if I may borrow your page here.
Sure.
Everything looks just like this when you get it as a story. The question as the director is, what am I going to do with that? How am I going to make my stamp on it, or how am I going to put my vision into it? The way you realize that is through creating images that represent what you want to do with it. So you go through the story and come up with moments and how you'd like to frame them and so on. You use it as a guide for the shooting, and it helps you plan the key things that you have in mind, but it also gives you an editing rhythm of various shots.
Very cool. So let me ask, who actually uses these storyboards?
Well, the first person is the director, of course, because it's really their interpretation that they're trying to get everybody on board with. And so you'll, as a storyboard artist, sit and work with them specifically to get their specific feedback. And once their description, their concept in their head is put down on paper and it becomes an image that's negotiable that they can look at and say, oh, you know what, now that I see it, instead of that, I want to do some other thing, or let's try this other thing instead of what we have down there. Or under another one of the keys, the director of photography or someone might take a look at it, or the stunt coordinator will take a look at it and say, this is something that we can do, but it would look better from this side because we can hide this element of it. So you start with the director and then you disseminate it around. All the keys can use it, the cinematographers and stunt people, but then it's also good for marketing and advertising and your editors and everything. It can be used really throughout the whole thing. It's especially useful for the crew on the shoot, so they can give them some direction as far as the setups, because you try and fit so many into a day and say, here's what we're trying to do. This is the shot on the board here. Use any one of these on the background. Say, this is the one that we're going for. So that's what we're framing. Get, stage lighting around that. That's the next set we're moving to, and so on.
Very cool.
So it covers the whole spectrum.
So a lot of people can use them. It's not just for a director. It kind of goes across the whole spectrum into editing as well.
Yep.
Very cool. So what information would help to create these boards? Like, what would go into it that would actually help them? Okay.
The kinds of information that would benefit you to have in the boards is, first of all, knowing what the setting of that scene is, or in general the story. But of this particular scene, for example, you would probably work on action scenes or stunt scenes or visual effects scenes first, because they're the things with the most variables and have the most other groups that they're going to be spread out to. So you would say, well, where are we when this happens? Are we outdoors? Are we indoors? Is it confined space or open? You get a sense of what the environment is, and it especially helps if they have an actual location in mind, or that they can refer to and say, it's like this other place. We don't have it right here, but it's supposed to look like this other kind of setup. So you get a sense of what the environment is. You want to get an idea of basically how many principal characters are in it and what their general appearance is. And that's really the basic information that you need to start with, because then you can figure out, well, if it's two characters, and there's a lot of people that I talk to, and students in class that are not illustrators or not confident illustrators, say, well, I can only draw stick figures or something like that. Now, if you can establish that you have one character is thin and one is big, then you have this character, and they're pretty easy to tell apart. So even at a rudimentary, simple drawing level, you can say, I know who this is and I know who that is, so I'm halfway to figuring out, I know who's on what part of the frame and so on.
Very cool. Anything else, any other type of things that go into it, like photos or anything to help it, or is general, or is more better or less better for boards?
More than nothing is better.
Okay.
So like a lot of times the impulse is to skip the drawing and say, I know what I want to see. And that's a dangerous step, because a lot of times as soon as it gets put down so you can see it, you change your mind.
Right.
And it's common for people to go into editing and look at the stuff that they've shot and go, I wish we had done this differently. Well, this gives you a chance to do that ahead of time. Gotcha. So once you get, for example, your environments and your characters and things, you start to add in camera motion, and you want to include arrows to say, like, the two principal kinds of motion that you're going to deal with is is the camera moving, or is something moving within the frame while the camera's stationary?
Right.
So you want to be able to indicate that kind of thing in the boards and say it would be better for this character to go, come forward to the camera and then go sideways instead of go sideways and then come forward or something. It sounds very simple, but once you get those down and start to see the comparison and how the scene flows and what opportunity, given that shot that I just came up with, what's the next thing, what's the next logical step in that sequence, or where would we frame it from, or what would they want to do, or where do they enter the frame from? All those questions come from having that starter image. So even as a basic stick figure drawing, when I say it's negotiable, I just mean you can look at it and say, yeah, I like that, or no, not like that.
Right.
And they're equally valuable.
Gotcha.
Being able to say no to a picture is just as valuable as being able to say yes, because it's giving you the direction, it's showing you. Once you've done that first picture, it gives you a chance to already improve the finished product.
Nice.
By saying, not like this, do it a different way or a better way. So your finished product is already getting better without you being able to see it, just because you're getting your ideas improved.
Very cool. Nice. Okay, so what about, where do you get all the information that goes into a storyboard? Where would you resource or?
Well, the first place is scripts. Everything is derived from that. So you start with the script, and I can give you, like, for example, if I'm working on a commercial, I'll give you the basic rhythm, and it'll give you, I think, an answer to that.
Perfect.
Is that I will typically get a script on one day and say, we'll have a meeting with the director the next morning. So here's your copy of the script. So my first thing to do is read through it and get a sense of those things I was describing, environment, number of characters, and so on. And if there's anything that's described that I'm not quite sure what it looks like, or I want to be able to describe with the director what it looks like, I'll go and find pictures. I'll do, go on Google image search or something and look for diners and get a couple of different kinds of diners if that's the thing. Or they're supposed to be out in the desert. Okay, well, is the desert all flat, or does the desert have a jagged horizon, or does the desert look like this or that? So, like, what do you mean by the car? What do you mean by it's a living room, okay? So what is that? It helps me to collect pictures like that and bring in a folder so I can discuss it and have something that, again, is a negotiable thing. It's better, even still for me, if the director has done things, we call them director boards or thumbnail drawings, where they're just very simple representations of it. And if they can show me their very basic version, it saves me the time in our meeting of coming up with that and then moving on to the next thing. The director's times are generally very limited. They might have like a 90-minute or 2-hour block in the morning to meet with me, but then they've got to take care of all of the other stuff. They've got to go on location scout, and they've got to deal with casting, and they've got to do some other thing. So I get a very limited time to work with them. I have to get as many questions generated and answered as I can while they're sitting there.
Right.
So I bring as much in terms of visual support, reference material to say, it says the character's in a sports car, here's a Lamborghini, here's a Porsche, here's a this and this, what do you like out of this group? And they can say, I hadn't really thought about it, but I guess I like that one. And that information is important for me as the illustrator, because I now have to make that, I have to fill in that blank on each page. On each big daunting blank
So
page.
you find yourself researching a lot when it comes to storyboards. Like, you find yourself gathering all the images and then bringing it to the director and saying, this is what I have, what do you think? Because a lot of them, they don't have specifics, and you kind of bring those ideas to them with different research that you've done of photos and things.
I do. I bring them, not only do I bring them pictures, and I assume that they're going to have some too, but of course it's silly to do that, because you're going to get there, and if they don't have any and you relied on them, then it doesn't really work out too well. But in addition to bringing them pictures, I will also go through, I always print out the script as soon as I get it, because then as I'm reading along through it, if I can picture the action that's being described, I just make a little simple, just like there's a little stick figure drawing, maybe even a little better, but put them right on the page next to the script, next to the line of the script that it's referring to, so I can have these little sort of bookmarks on the way through. So as we sit down for the first time to discuss it the next morning, I can say, okay, it says this point in the script here, I was imagining something like this, and he can go, no, it's not like that. I have a different idea.
Okay.
All right, fine. Or if you can look at it and go, okay, well, let's consider that. Okay, those are both wins, because they both indicate a direction.
Very cool.
That you wouldn't get with just a blank page.
Nice. Very good information. So what do you want to make sure that you always include on a storyboard?
Well, the storyboard page is basically incorporates two basic things, and one is the drawing or the photograph. They're equally valid ways to do it, just whatever that visual representation of the shot is. You get that picture, and then you get some amount of text that describes it. So it's totally fine to, if you have stick figures, to write character names and put arrows to them, or write the character name over the stick figure drawing of them is fine. But what you basically want to say with the text is, let's say, from this picture, in case you can't tell what you're looking at, this is what it is. This circle, that's the bigger guy. Or this rectangle, that's the table. Okay, and a lot of people have difficulty drawing in perspective and things like that. Storyboards don't have to be very nuanced, clean, good illustration to be functional. Like they can be considered bad drawings, but they can be considered at the same time good storyboards.
Right.
Because the people who are going to be working on them understand what that is. The people who are on the shoot, if you say this is the table and the room only has one table, then everybody knows what that is. So even if it doesn't look like a table, you say that's what that is, then everyone goes, all right, I get it.
Right. Is there ever a case of too much text or too much on a storyboard that makes it busy, or is that better to have more? If you can walk the line between more descriptive and less busy at the same time, that's better. So if, for example, you want to say something descriptive about the camera move, the camera's going to push in from a wide shot and come around this person and then stop on a close-up of this other person. You could easily fill up the side of the page with text that's very descriptive, but that doesn't really help because you should be able to more or less get the boards at a glance. Right.
So if you can, that's great, and if not, whatever the most concise version is, that's why like a big arrow or something that says camera, you know, on it and goes into the shot or something like that is conveying all that information, but in a bold, simple way.
Sticks out right there so they can all get it.
Yeah, the text is mostly support, and unless you're, some directors are very specific about when they say this phrase, like the first half of the sentence, I want to see them, and on the second half of the sentence, I want to see the reaction of the other person. So you have the close-up of the person talking, and then it says the first half of their line next to it, and then the next shot will have the person's reaction and like the second half of that line, just so you know that it's very specific. It's not only guiding the way that you're shooting it, but it's also, this is someone who's thinking about editing at the same time. Like they like the beats of that.
Right.
So either way, you still get the recording of them, the full reaction shot and the full line delivery, but you know that the intention is to cut it in the middle and see the reaction, yeah.
Well, that's good information. Thank you. Cool, I think we're about to take a break real quick, give the students a chance to actually find some good suggestions from you on how to get more information on storyboards. So when we come back, we will be able to tell you guys how to actually implement and create these storyboards. So we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Cool.
Hey guys, and we are back with Dan and Koviak, and we're going to talk a little bit more about storyboards. And let's see, so what ways can you create a storyboard? And we all know our basic storyboard, drawings, but are there other ways that can still be considered a storyboard?
There are, and they're all, if you keep in mind that the storyboard is not just the picture, but storyboarding is a sort of a term that describes the whole process of figuring out what you want to see and how you see it. And so you can use different media for exploring that. The simplest thing to do is if you have a pencil and paper or something, I wind up drawing on napkins or the back of menus or whatever's available. It's just, that's the basic version of it. But you can do digital drawing if you have that access to that, but any photograph is fine. You stage the scene a certain way based on what's in the script. Almost all the students that I encounter now have either a camera in one of their appliances that they have, or at least know somebody else because they're all in the same room. Mm-hmm. So everyone either has a camera or has access to one, so it's very easy to go out and take your story and frame up some ideas and walk through it. You can do it on video. You can shoot. Some people shoot right off their laptops. I've seen them walking around if they're using the camera on the back of their laptop or tablets. That's common too. But especially phones are the other common thing now too, is to see people walk around because you get the nice big screen. Mm-hmm. So people go ahead and phrase that. The drawings are still the simplest for coming up with a basic idea and communicating a basic idea, and especially if you're the director or you're the one who's been given the task of the storyboarding of the process, it gives you something in solitude to be able to just think about it and put it down and sketch things out and change them and see what develops and so on. There's actually, I think I have here, a template of boards that I give out in lectures. When I do those with the students, I'll give them a blank page, which is basically just this. It's got 12 small panels on it. These are basically considered thumbnail size. Mm-hmm. While I wouldn't suggest that they draw these to then hand out to their crews, if you take this, it gives you the opportunity to make a simple scribble that gets the basic information down, and if you don't like the basic information the way it looks, you go to the next one and try it again. We usually will do like a 3-shot sequence in the class, but anyone who has the capacity to make a rectangle on a page in some fashion, tracing around something or printing it out if you print layouts in Photoshop or Corel or something, to then use those as a guide to just give yourself a frame to work within, aspect ratio and frame to work within, and just doodle the ideas, just in very simple terms there. The cameras are the second best way for the stills. The advantage of the camera is, of course, that you can take it to an actual location that is similar. If the story's set in a diner, you're like, well, what kind of diner? I don't know. Hey, it's late, we'll just go to Denny's or something. You go there and you photograph and you sit at the table and say, here's the shot where the person's sitting across the table, and now you stand up next to the table and here's the point of view of the waitress. And so you can collect your pictures that way.
Gotcha.
Yeah, for exteriors or interiors the same way. If you can do them on video, if you can bring a camera around, and then you start to get a sense of what's it like if the camera moves. Mm-hmm. So all of this is taking your core idea for how it's going to be presented and advancing it each time. So it's the same basic idea as making a scribble and then making a different scribble, not a better drawing, but just a different composition, basically. Right. Hopefully that what you're doing is improving as you go along.
Improving the idea.
Yeah.
Do you find that storyboard artists as an occupation out there, that even if they can't draw, they can still be a storyboard artist by using images, or is it better to have some skill in drawing? Is it?
That's a good question. Uh-huh. I would say that if you're going to be trying to make a career or a short-term job or something out of being the storyboard artist, you need to bring the ability to create that picture somehow, like to sketch it out, and pens or pencils or markers or digitally, however you can, the ability to generate an image that is understandable is necessary for a storyboard artist. Okay. But as a director or someone who's contributing visual ideas but is not responsible for the presentation of them that way.
Right. Anyway is fine.
Anyway is fine. Okay. I often show a clip from the DVD of Goodfellas. Mm-hmm. There's a segment on there that's called Paper is Cheaper Than Film, and it's about how you're basically making a first edit of your picture by making storyboards, and it shows you, for example, a script page of Martin Scorsese's script, and here's his text, and then there's a very, very simple stick figure drawing with some notes around it. Mm-hmm. And that's a nice segment to look at, because it plays the scene in the background and then shows you this still thumbnail image that he created and then pulls back, so you can see how it goes from what would be considered not a good drawing, but it serves its purpose as a storyboard, and so it serves its function. It's a good storyboard, while at the same time maybe being considered a bad drawing.
Okay, well, that makes sense.
And if I can make one other point about that.
Of course, yes.
That's one of the complexes that I run into with people when we try and discuss or do an exercise. Like, I'll tell the room, it's okay if you can't draw. It's not, as a storyboard person, you don't get hired to create gallery artwork or anything. You're just trying to interpret and pass on. That's all you're doing. So I go to them each individually and they say, I can't draw. I'm like, we already covered that. But the ability to make a drawing that someone who's not involved with the project would look at and go, that's awful. Why do you bother drawing? You know, why would you make something that looks like that? Obviously, it doesn't really help. If they're not involved with the project, then their opinion about that is, I would consider irrelevant. It's because if someone who's on the shoot, as I was saying a little bit earlier about the simple pictures, if someone on the shoot, they know the context of the scene, they know what's going on, and if you scribble something and say, this thing over here is the main character, and this thing over here is going to be the car, they're like, got it.
Got it.
So it's done its purpose, and you could then take that and show your mom, and she would say, yeah, you're not really an artist, right? And it doesn't matter, right? That dig doesn't matter.
Right, exactly.
Because the people who are relevant to understanding they get it.
And that's
so it's okay to make all you're going to do is take that simple bad drawing and make an improvement on it by then going out with the camera and saying, okay, go take a picture of two people in these positions, standing here and here, or facing each other, or whatever it is, over the shoulder. You take some pictures based on these drawings and bring them back.
Gotcha. Cool.
Each time it gets better.
And so in addition to that, what special things can you do to draw like lens choices or lighting choices for the shot, for each shot?
Well, it's good to know, for example, if you're going to be using wide angle lenses, this is information that you should be able to either receive from the director or pull from the director. Okay, I was saying that you have that sort of small opportunity sometimes on the commercials, I get that small window of time that I can have that discussion with them. If you're working on a feature and you're going to be on it for a couple of weeks or something like that, you might have more interchange available with them. You might be able to throw that back and forth and make a discussion out of it. But got off on a whole tangent. What was the actual question again?
So like when you go to draw the storyboards, how can you say what kind of lens choices
the
or
lenses
lighting choices to like?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, first of all, having some experience with photography would help. And I'm not talking about darker film experience and that whole thing, but you take your basic camera, and most cameras have an ability to go from a wide angle to a zoom of some kind. Okay, so being able to know the difference between what does it look like, because there's two ways I can create a close-up picture. I can hold the camera here on a wide angle and I got you in close-up. I can put the camera over there and zoom in. Same composition, you take up the same amount of space, it's still a close-up, but the picture itself looks completely different because from here, I see all the wall and the detail back there is all sharp probably. You're much bigger than things that are behind you and so on. From back there, the background will be out of focus, things will be a little flattened, you don't get that sense of perspective. So understanding the basic differences between what the effects of different lenses are helps you go into it. That's why it's good to, as a storyboard artist, you're probably going to have some experience with photography and be able to recognize or recommend or create a picture saying, I came up with the idea of doing this one long lens because it's gonna, a long lens you only see this amount of space as opposed to a wide angle lens, so we only have to dress this amount of, this narrow path of framing area for it, for example. You get to economize. That means I don't have to decorate a whole set. I can decorate just this portion, put things in front of the camera for that shot because I know that with this long lens, it's gonna collapse everything like that. It's not worth.
So when you actually draw the storyboard, as far as the lens you want to use, is the perspective of how you draw, they'll get that.
Yep, and for example, if you have, you draw a full body person that's this big and a full body person that's this big, you can interpret visually from that one person is further away than the other. Okay, on the page they're like this, but you can say, it looks like that the smaller person is further away. And especially if you write in that text section on the page, you write wide angle lens, this character's close, this other character's far, like, I get it. Okay, it's Grover from Sesame Street, right?
Exactly.
Like, near, far, got it, right?
And for lighting choices, is that something you would just note kind of on the side? Or would you draw like a...
I would put something in, like we do what's called a drop shadow, or they call it spot color sometimes in illustration, where you want to do shading to represent the background, for example. A lot of times, I work in pen and marker mostly, and digitally. So either way, you can see like from some of the drawings on the back here that there's some amount of shading to say whatever's the closest thing in the foreground, I'm just going to shade that in, and you get a sense that it's either silhouetted or backlit or something like that. Or you can, on one project I was on with the characters, it was relevant that it was golden hour. They were going to be on top of a mesa in the desert, and they said we want it to be, when we film, it's going to be golden hour, and there's going to be a helicopter going all around them. So I was working in grayscale, which is typical, but to convey the fact that it was late afternoon, I threw a shadow on the ground and then over the guy's motorcycle a little bit, so you get a sense of where the sunlight is coming from, which tells you that it's golden hour, even though it's a black and white picture and with just a little bit of gray. Like you can tell the angle of where the shadow is going, where the sun is. So simple things like that.
Cool. Very cool. It makes perfect sense, actually. So how would you draw camera movement? In addition to the lighting and the lens choices, how would that be conveyed in there?
Well, the camera movement is one of the two principal kinds of things, right? There's the movement within the frame that you want to be able to indicate graphically in the picture and describe in the text, and the camera movement is the other big one. There's simple camera moves that are easy to illustrate, and there's more complicated ones that are also easy to illustrate. If you were doing something like going from a wide shot to a tight shot, you can draw one frame and then draw a smaller frame within it, and then that basically sets up the fact that you're going from wide to tight. And if you draw an arrow from the outer one to the inner one, then it tells you that's the direction you're going. If the arrow went the other way, it would mean you're going from tight shot to a wide shot. If you're trying to convey that the camera's tracking alongside something, if you can put the storyboard images next to each other like that, so that your eye just naturally follows them that way, it sort of helps reinforce that. And you would also use arrows in some capacity. It's common sometimes. There's no hard rule about what kind of arrow is better, if it's a single stick line arrow or if it's a larger one that you can actually write text in or something like that. They're both fine. You don't want an arrow that's so big that it covers up most of the picture, because then you kind of have undone your work. But if you can have description, an arrow that says camera, it's big enough to write the word camera in, and it lets you know that it's going a certain direction, that's fine. That's to describe like simple camera moves. So if the camera is making a straight line move like that, that's great. If it's making a straight line move like that, that's great. If it's a crane or boom shot that they would describe, that's a vertical thing. You have one picture on top of the other maybe, and you would have an arrow that points down if your camera's coming down, for example. And those are pretty straightforward. If you want to get into something that's a little bit more complicated, a more compound shot that's like, your camera's going to be free. It's on your shoulder, or it's handheld or Steadicam. You're going to be wandering with it a little bit.
Like a one shot, the whole thing?
Yeah.
How would you get around that?
Yeah, well, if you wanted to go through and change the direction that the camera's looking all the way through, you're going to do, let's say, an S-curve through a room. When we come over here, we want to see this. Here we want to see this. Here we want to see this. You would basically take a floor plan, put together a basic floor plan of what's going on in that room. Let's say you're in a restaurant and there's a stage where the band is playing or whatever, a lounge. So you do a basic floor plan to say here's where the stage is, here's where the people are, now where are the principal characters going to be? As we come through, are we following them through? Do they interact with something on the way through the room that we want to focus on or turn the camera to? So on the floor plan of the layout of the room, you draw the path that you want the camera to go in, and then you pick a handful of spots along there that are significant. The people walk in the door is the first significant thing. They go up to the bar and shake hands with the bartender or whatever, that's the second move. The next thing to come over and someone moves the table, that's the third move. So along your path that you've drawn out, you just mark A, B, C, D, E, F of these key camera moves, and then you draw them out on the panels just like you would any other ones.
Each key camera move you would then make its own?
Yep.
Oh, nice.
So it would all be one continuous shot, for example, like let's say that's the first shot. That's shot number one, A is at the door, B is at the bar, C is at the table, and so on. So you would have an arrangement of panels just like any other ones, and it would be 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, and you have a floor plan along with those. Like when you hand it out to people, you say, here's the floor plan, here's the boards that go along with it, this is the path we're following, and so on. You can start to figure out lighting and whether the set has to be able to move or any of the other factors that go along with that, filling it with extras, or what are you going to do?
Cool. That's interesting. I've always wondered how that happened.
Right.
So how do you convey different types of emphasis?
Composition is one of them. There's a couple different things that you can do to draw attention, and they are things like contrast, whether it's like I referred earlier to like a silhouetted element of it. You know, if they have a line drawing and part of it is shaded in or blacked out or bold or something like that, then that graphically draws your eye to it. If you use lines of perspective, you know, there's golden rules of composition where you try to adjust in a frame like where the dominant attention is going to be drawn to and sort of frame it so that the lines of the building or the room converge at a certain point in the frame and the composition, and you stage your action there. That way it's supported by the fact that all the lines go to it, you know, and it's if you can use movement within the frame is another way to do it, where if one thing is stationary and everything else is moving, you know, then maybe your eye is drawn to the stationary thing, and as simple as using light and dark. Too, you know, if it's a dimmer room and then there's the light is on the one person, you're going to kind of be drawn to it like that. Yeah. You think of shots like in Schindler's List when Liam Neeson is sitting in his introductory shots, he's in this restaurant or something like that, and there's a lot of soft focus, and he's in focus, and there's special lighting on him, of course, because that's the style of the lighting from it. So between the fact that part of it is fuzzy or out of focus and part of it is sharp, obviously your eye goes right to the sharp part. And then if the lighting is particular too, or if there's contrast within the lighting on it, your eye's going to go right to that too. Those are and perspective lines, you know, any of those things all contribute to drawing your attention to a focused part of the shot.
Nice. Cool. So what would you say are some techniques to show motion within a storyboard?
Well, by using the arrows is good for showing the motion. You can draw multiple. If you're trying to show motion across a broad spectrum, you might want to use multiple panels to show that if something is covering a lot of ground. But mostly arrows would describe motion for the different things, and then of course taking advantage of the opportunity to have text. You know, you have.
So text is okay.
Yeah. You say this person's riding their bike through the shot, or whatever the thing is. The text, again, is just there to support the picture and say, in case you can't tell from looking at the picture, this is what's going on.
And do you draw details of like faces? Does that help, like face expressions or anything with that they're?
Sure, sometimes. Yeah. You know, in a basic form, the expression isn't going to be as essential, but you know, for shooting purposes, I should draw the line there and say, you don't need expressions on the faces in order to shoot it, but it helps the people who look at it to get a sense of what's going on if there's some expression that's a part of that too. Okay. Sometimes if there's a recognizable talent that's working on the project, the storyboard artist will aim for a resemblance so that the main character, like if you're doing the Avengers and you're going to know that you're going to be able to recognize Samuel Jackson's character in the storyboard, like, well, yeah. You know. Okay. And you know, Tom Cruise or whoever's the lead or the main character, you'll see a lot of sort of generic faces around, and then like,
oh, I know that
it kind of looks like, yeah.
Okay, and then what can we do, or how do we make each frame interesting? Is there like different variety, or is there certain things that you can make it more interesting? Well, the challenge
is to make the shots interesting, and it's also to make them fit together. So when it comes to I think about, when I talk to the students in lectures, I mentioned to them about when they look at other students' 16 millimeter films, for example, because at this school, they make a 16 millimeter and then a 35. And usually when they're editing their 16, they're shaking their heads and going, ugh, ugh, ugh. In 35, they're like, let's not do that again. Right? So that's, your storyboard is the 16 millimeter version of your finished project, which is the 35. It's kind of that relationship. So the idea is to make, you have this impulse as a director, I want to see this cool shot. And you might have a normal scene developing the way a normal scene will, and then you have this one big, bold, different shot, and then you go back to something that's more normal. And then that actually works against you to do that sort of thing where it's a sort of clumsy, ham-handed insertion of this shot that you wanted to get because it was a really cool idea. Unfortunately, it takes the audience out of what you already have going. So it worked as a great idea to coalesce your idea for the scene around, but when you keep that one shot just because of its cool factor, a lot of times it's going to take you out of the scene. You're like, or if it's some really obvious visual effect, it'll just take the steam out of it.
Just kind of stand out. Cool. Well, that's awesome information. Thank you. I think we're going to go ahead and take another break, you guys, and we'll be right back with Dan, and he'll actually talk to us about some of his professional experience that he's done out in the industry. So we'll see you guys in about a couple minutes. right, guys, and we are back with Dan and Koviak. And if you guys have any questions for our guests, please remember to put them in the chat box, and we'll answer them after the end of this segment. All right, so let's get back to our little discussion. I noticed you have some things here on the desk. What did you bring with you, and what are these all about?
Okay, I brought a couple of examples of good references for people who are interested in getting a look at what the range of storyboard material is that's available, either to see collections from movies or how to do them if they want to learn how can I learn to draw the ideas that are in my story or something like that. There's a couple of resources for that, as well as some art supplies and to show the tools that I use in particular.
Definitely.
I'll start with the books. That there's a whole category of books that I find a lot of people aren't aware of, which is shooting scripts or illustrated screenplays that are available in paperbacks and from online in a bookstore still. I have like Raiders of the Lost Ark, one of my favorite movies, illustrated screenplay, which contains the shooting script plus a lot of storyboards. I have one from Inception here, which has the whole script and digital concept art and storyboarded scenes. So there's illustrations that are basically sketch style pages like that. There's a book that's used by everyone I know that's an illustrator, storyboards, or people who are comic fans also, and it's by Stan Lee. It's called How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. And it's not just about comic book characters, because of course not everything can be. But it does involve, in particular, descriptions of things like composition, how to create interesting or boring compositions. So there's pages that take a scene and show something that's very flat and ordinary, and then the same scene with a little bit more dramatic kind of staging. So it shows you both how to draw figures in stick figure kind of drawings, and how to basically create versions of people that are not terrible to look at, in case you're concerned about that. But principally, I like to recommend that book because of its information on composition, shot composition, and a lot of times if you just take a camera to the room or where the talent is and start shooting, the compositions look very flat.
Right.
They're boring, or they're somehow either too forced or something like that. So if you get a chance to figure out your scene, how you like the play of wide shots and tighter shots, or camera movement or dramatic motion in the frame, you can figure those out in the drawings first. It helps your photographic version. It helps your video test version if you decide to do those. They all are improved by having come up with those ideas a little bit earlier too.
Right.
There's actually a book about storyboards in particular, it's one that I get some use out of, called Storyboards, Motion, and Art. And that describes not only how to storyboard, but how people who develop that skill can use them both for production, for animation, for commercials and videos, advertising. Every commercial that's out there basically will start with storyboards of some kind. They might be used for presentation to clients, and they might be full color and clean, detailed and everything, or they might just be used for shooting, and they can be very simple sketch style, maybe with a little bit of gray thrown in, or maybe not, just for the purposes of being able to frame the shots and get them done. So that's another one that I find is really good. And it might seem a little bit silly, but also Mad Magazine is a reference that a lot of my friends who are illustrators like, and it's not just because of goofy writing, but it's because the pictures are fun to look at. And if you can hand your client, or if you're producing, you're the producer and you're trying to get people interested in contributing money for the script, the more engaging you make the pictures, the more enthusiastic people can be about looking at them or enjoying them or imagining where they could go next. So
that's a good idea.
Yeah, there's the way that they draw the movies, of course, you can recognize when Mad does a movie parody, and you can recognize that, but then the way the drawings are a little bit caricatured, and they do the same things that I've been describing here with use of black and white or grayscale or soft focus or things. You get a sense of how the pictures can be fun to look at, and you could still take any of these film parodies that are in here and go and shoot from them, because they're very clearly portrayed about what's going on in the shot, and you can a lot of times get what kind of lenses even that they're using.
That's a good tip.
That sort of material.
Those are fun books. What else do you have here?
That's good stuff.
Yeah, that is good stuff.
I always have a sketchbook.
Always? Do you always carry it?
I do. You can tell the beat up ones are the ones that I carry in my pocket.
Yeah.
But I pretty much always have that. Like I was saying, you can use napkins and menus and things if you have to. It's tougher to carry around a stack of menus. So I like to carry around a small book like this, and I can do little thumbnail sketches or things like that on these pages, which are fine. It's portable. I'm not carrying. I don't need a bag or anything to carry around. Something that's this size is easy enough to just carry in my pocket. And so if you have a small notebook like that you can make those pictures in, that's great. I also use a larger notebook that I can fill up with. I don't necessarily make larger pictures, but I'll take this big notebook and make the same size drawings and just fill up a whole page with them. So I can explore a whole scene on one page instead of having to go through several pages on this kind. It gives me a little bit of a bigger canvas, and I can go through. And this sort of incorporates the, I was referring to spot color or spot tone earlier. Here I just use a little bit of gray to separate the background from the main character. So now in the line drawing you would still see this, but having a little gray to make the background distinct has created a sense of foreground and background.
Exactly.
So a lot of this has a shaded element or a silhouette or something like that, just to help create some separation there.
That's awesome. I personally can't draw for anything. I always respect a good artist because I wish I can draw.
We could make you create a functional picture.
Right. As long as it's
that's the important
functional.
thing. The other thing I would mention in terms of materials, because I get questions about materials sometimes. I would draw digitally also. You can draw. Some people use a tablet like this and a stylus, something like that, or I have a laptop and I draw on the screen as a touch screen, or you can use like Cintiq monitors, which are the big desktop touchscreen monitors, and they're great.
Yeah.
But they're a little bit tough to come by, depending on where you are. So if you're looking for, if you're going to be working on paper, you're going to be working on paper and you want to explore some different materials. A lot of people work in pencil. I don't generally, but I do sometimes. It's because it's easier to make changes. And changes being a natural, inherent part of the storyboard process. Like the idea is to put something down that you can make better with the next version of it. So it's good to have a pencil and eraser for that. I tend to draw primarily in pen and marker. So I use drafting pens or art pens, and then alcohol-based markers for shading. You can get these in different kinds of gray shading scales, light to dark, a full range, and a couple of hundred different colors of them too. And there's several brands of those that are out there too. I would on my what I would like to recommend as the poor person's versatile art toolkit. I'll carry around just one of each of these. I use a regular drawing pen, and I use whatever the lightest gray marker that I can is, because the alcohol base will spread the black ink a little bit of the pen. So instead of having just a very light gray and a black line, it'll now create a shaded effect, and I can build up just using these two back and forth a full range of shading, and it means, like with the small notebook, it's economy of materials that you carry with you. Perfect. And for that purpose, I also use a kind of paper that is designed for markers, because these are they tend to soak through. Yeah. If you were to stack a bunch of regular copy paper and then start coloring on it with one of these, you take the page off and now it's on the other page down. Damn. So instead of doing that, you can use marker paper that's dedicated for markers, which has a sort of coating on the back of the page, so you can do as much coloring or shading on the white part of the page as you want to, and it's not going to bleed through because it's got a treatment on the back. Oh, nice. So it's specifically for markers, and it handles things like fine drawing pens very, very well too.
Very cool.
So those are the basic materials that I use for creating the pictures. That's
good, because I'm sure a lot of them want to know, how do you actually sit down and do your work, So getting back to, these are your resources, how did you actually get started creating storyboards in the business?
Should I dial it back to right before I was doing it in the business? My interest comes from drawing as the most accessible way. As a kid, just if you're trying to realize your ideas, you sit down creatively. What are you going to do with it? And drawing in some fashion usually tends to be the thing. So I enjoyed drawing and I enjoyed exploring that, but I was also motivated by movies. And movies are kinetic and exciting and interesting and give you a bunch of ideas. So I would try and draw the things from movies that I saw, and then if I had an idea of my own, like it would be cool if they had done this, or if I had a story to do this, and I would draw that out. That led to photography, because a picture is probably going to look better than my drawing in my mind, right? Right. If it's the same way in everybody else's mind, that's fine. But so I would take it and learning photography and focus and balance and exposure and seeing how you can control and create and push images with photography added to my drawing sense of general composition, and that sort of moved ahead, and I wound up storyboarding without realizing that it was a job. Like people have that, at the time, even movies that I watched as a kid, there were people who were hired to storyboard those pictures, but I didn't know anything about it because they don't publicize that stuff. Right. They do a little bit more now. It's more readily available to see what other people's contributions are. But I was already deep into high school before I found out that there was someone whose job it had been to storyboard Star Wars movies or something like that. Like, wait a second, what?
The light went off like,
yeah, like that. You mean the thing I've been doing?
Yeah.
All right. So that's sort of what put me in the direction of it. And then when I was in school for theatrical design, my interest had been to go into the film program to do production design and art direction things. But the school that I went to had a film program without an art department, and it had a theater department that taught set building and painting. I'm like, yeah, okay, well, I honestly don't care for me so much about the gear and the lights and all of that stuff. I'm more interested in coming up with the images and creating that stuff. So I went over to the theater side and then tried to take a class, take the film production, the one class that they had in art direction. And the instructor of that happened to be more or less a guest person at the school. And I was the only person in the class who was really invested in the art direction part. Everybody else was there because they had to be.
Right.
All film students who were more concerned about the gear and the shooting and the editing, they're like, I have to take an art direction class.
Right.
And meanwhile, I'm the only person.
Like,
yeah. So he's like, listen, if you want, we can work with it a little bit, or when you get out of school or something, if you want, you can come and work with me a little bit. So I got started working with him, and he's a storyboard artist, and I came up helping him out on some jobs and then taking some jobs, and then just being one of the people that he calls now for doing that work.
Are you still in contact with him?
Yeah.
Very cool. That's awesome.
This is actually his book too.
No way. So you brought a piece of him here.
That's right. His name is Mark Simon, and he has this book on storyboards, and he has another couple of books about how to draw faces and expression. You were asking earlier about how to draw expression in them. And a lot of times it's difficult to imagine what a person's smile looks like if the camera's over here. Like, how do you draw a smiling person from over the shoulder?
Right.
He has a great book that shows people holding expressions and then camera positions
so cool.
around their faces to show what that expression looks like from different angles and from low and high and so on.
Awesome.
So he had steered me into the business, and I've taken on other jobs and gotten to know other people and networking basically from there.
Big time. And so what skills do you think, or what skills do you need to become a storyboard artist? I mean, besides, photography and stuff like we talked about, is there specifics of any sort?
Yeah, in addition to being able to make a picture that is understandable, to create the picture that's understandable, that's the first basic thing. To make it good is going to be the next stage of that too. But you're also going to need an awareness of the film production, and it helps to have an awareness of things like visual effects, methods of creating them, if you're going to be using a green screen, or if you can recommend to someone that for this shot, it may be tough for you to get this in camera, but if you just mask off this section with blue or green, and then you can composite in this other element. If you have some working knowledge of basic visual effects and how things are shot separately or created separately and then put together,
right,
you can bring that information to it too. Actually, that segues to one of the other things that I had here, which is a Cinefex magazine, which a lot of my students, I forget where I put that already. But anyways,
there it is.
Cinefex magazine, Cinefex, but it comes out quarterly, and it describes visual effects production, usually for 3 or 4 movies, and maybe a commercial or something that's from a HBO series or something like that. But you get to see how this particular edition covers Star Trek and Angels and Demons. Oh, cool. Angels and Demons is a story that's set in Rome and in churches and through all this famous architecture, and they couldn't obviously shoot in all those places. And a lot of times they shot on very limited sets and used green backdrops, and for some things used photographic miniatures that were a couple of feet tall, or they used computer graphic things. But it breaks it down for you and lets you see what the features that you like were able to do to create the environments and all that kind of thing. So if you can bring a knowledge of that sort of material to it and be able to suggest ways of shooting it or suggest a method, then that helps too. It doesn't mean that they're going to take it. It just means that you have more information to supply, and that's always better.
Very cool. That's awesome.
And also, I would say, if I can add on to that too, a sense of the timing, the pace that they have to work with. A lot of times the hiring of a storyboard artist is based on the budget that they have. They say, look, we can afford a storyboard person for one day. Let's start there, okay? Say, well, all right, well, what are we going to do in that one day? You got a couple of different scenes. Do you want to have a couple of different scenes illustrated out in a very quick, loose way because that's what you have to do? The director says, first shot right here where he's at the desk, I want that over the shoulder, and the next thing, that's as much time as you have to draw that picture, so how good can it be, right? You're like that?
Right.
Like that?
Right.
And you're looking for a yes or no. So do you want to have 3 scenes all drawn in that quick sketch version so that at least the director knows what it is and can pass it on? Right. Then that's okay. Or they might say, no, we really want this one scene with a little bit more detail. Okay, and then based on that, they might decide they want more, or they might be fine with that. But having a sense of their budget and what their time is a big part of it too. and a sense of organization of how to keep, because there's so much changes.
I was just going to say that, is being organized. I mean, because you say it's ever changing, you know, that they have to have some kind of organization to make it easy for everybody to work with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They'll go in and say, we have 20 pages of storyboards for this scene. On page 12, though, we're going to take out that middle shot, and we're going to move the other ones up and replace this other one. So you have to be able to access those things and make those changes.
Wow.
So having some sense of the organization and being able to keep track of the changes, which are, they can be tough after a while, but you have to just keep reminding yourself. And in fact, when I go into jobs now, if it's a multiple day job, each day that I go in, I just approach it as though I'm the new guy doing storyboards that day, and whatever they did yesterday is whatever it is, but they're gonna change it, or they're gonna want something new, and I can't get too attached to, man, we had this good idea going, we had this good thing going yesterday, because today if they say they want something different, it doesn't matter. Like you have to be able to let that go.
Right, and start fresh.
Yep.
So what do you say are some of your personal inspirations and influences that you have for you?
Well, for films, and you know, I grew up in the first films that really caught my attention was like Empire Strikes Back and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and these are the pictures that came out when I was around 10 or so, and I was hooked on that kind of thing. So it was not until about that time that I was aware that there was a director. You know, going back to knowing that someone had a storyboard job. Way before I got to that part of it, I was like, wait, there's a guy who made this, or a girl at that, not for those pictures, but but whichever.
Yeah.
So he's like, there's a person who is ultimately responsible for that. What's the story with that?
Yeah.
You know, so you find out those things, and by looking at the films that I liked and the people who made them and gotten to follow them, you know, I obviously follow Steven Spielberg since then, and Robert Zemeckis is another one that I've always liked for his live action films. The camera work and the timing and the comedy, but the visual effects work is always really good, and there's a lot of thought that's put into it. His pictures are nice too, because several of them have commentaries, Forrest Gump and Contact and things. You can listen to his description of it. Those are always beneficial too, like Ridley Scott or James Cameron and the other directors that have a strong, distinctive style. And a lot of times you can get their commentaries on their DVDs too and hear what they were thinking about. So that's.
I'm sorry to cut you off. Okay, I want to know more. What have you done? What projects are you working on now, or what type of directors have you worked for, aside from your ones that you grew up with in the past that you love now? Like, what do you find yourself working on, and who for, and what projects?
Okay. Well, I've worked for the different kinds of directors. It's funny the way that people approach that job differently. I've worked with people that let me put it this way: the first, there are hands-off directors and there are hands-on directors, kind of in terms of governing the way that image is put together. So when I first lived in Los Angeles, I worked for a director named Francis Lawrence, who's directing. Currently, he's on like the Hunger Games sequels, and he's directed a bunch of sort of bigger features prior to those. But I was working on commercials for him, and he would sit there at the desk, and as he would describe a shot and I would draw it, he'd go, no, not like that. Let's do this other thing. And so we would sit there, and as I would draw his idea out, he would change his mind about the angle, and we would go immediately back to some other thing. And I've worked with other directors who would be open to suggestion as far as changing shots, which is also good, whatever it's their way.
Yeah.
I worked on a project, a music video in Los Angeles. It was a video for Rick Ross and Neo. And there was the director for that I never got to meet. So on the other end of the spectrum, from the sitting next to me and just changing shots as we go, there's this other director I never even got to talk to. I had about a half-hour conversation with his DP. And that was it, and
Wow.
never got to have this part,
Physical.
which is a very helpful aspect of it. When I say, do you mean like this, and they say yes or no,
Right.
that's a key part of the development of those pictures.
Right.
We never really had that conversation, but he described for me very carefully, but quickly, within about a half an hour, what he and the director had gone over for the shots, and I frantically wrote notes as he was talking, and then drew the pictures and sent it to him. And a couple months later, looked at the video, and it was very close.
Wow.
You know,
Just
a lot of
by
shots
that short
are.
communication,
Yeah.
you pulled it off.
His communication to me, like his description and my interpretation, I guess they were close enough. But he was even able to give me, even though we didn't have pictures that we could hand back and forth, he said, we're going to be doing a helicopter through mountains, and it's like the opening scene from The Shining is kind of what we're thinking it's going to be like. Okay, that's good for me, because just him saying that, I can go to there's a website that showcases title design for movies, and they have a collection of the stills of the opening shot from The Shining, which saved me having to go and
Right.
find the movie. Like, oh good, there's the still pictures of it. So I got to use that as a reference for what he was talking about. So I would just draw shots that had similar, wide angle,
Right.
looking down on the road with the vehicle on it and so on.
Cool. Very cool. Well, I know we have a couple questions from the students
Okay.
that they want us to answer. So these are from our live chat box. They've been watching in. So we have a question from Frank from Chester, Virginia, and he wants to know, is there a computer program for storyboards?
There are a couple programs that are specifically for storyboards, and there are other ones that are good for it. There's and they have different approaches. Some of them, I think FrameForge is one that uses clip art figures that you can take a person and just put them into your shot. And that's okay if you really find drawing problematic. I use Photoshop for drawing mine. I just lay out the panels, and then I can make the thumbnails or loose drawings or detailed drawings within those panels myself. So you can buy some that are specifically for it, and you can buy some that are just make it easier. Or if you have something like like Google SketchUp is a free download of where you can create rooms and buildings and architecture, and you can move it around and frame it and create sort of shots that way in a sort of simple and cheap way.
Cool.
There's also a storyboard animation software. Probably the most versatile and encompassing one is called Storyboard Pro. That's from a company called Toon Boom. And it lets you draw in layers like in Photoshop, so you can have background on one layer and people on another layer and text and whatever you want. But you can also animate those layers, move them around a little bit, but you can print right from the program onto pages, so that it has storyboard layouts. You have 3-panel pages or 6 or 9-panel pages, whatever you choose. So you can draw it in the program, print it right out in panels and everything on a page already, but it gives you the versatility to add soundtrack and all that kind of thing. So you can create a full animatic, which is what I've been doing lately. The last couple of months working on a job where we started fleshing out the script with still pictures and storyboard panels, and then took that to, of the ideas that we like, let's put those to a little bit of motion. And so you can include camera moves, you can twist the camera, zoom, pan all over, all within the software, decide where you want the cameras to go.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's a really good and versatile program. That is the most encompassing one.
Very cool. Okay, so our next question comes from Timothy from Buena Park, California. And this is kind of what we were talking about a little bit, but can you create multiple boards for a single shot in order to show full movement of the shot? Does that kind of go back to what we were saying earlier?
Yeah, and especially for anybody who had missed that earlier, but yeah, to describe a single camera move, even if it's a straight line, it could be a straight line camera move. I'm saying, like, you start on one side of the street and you move in a straight line to the other side of the street, and a couple key things can happen during the course of that shot. I think of a director like Brian De Palma who will do a move like that, where it's not an elaborate camera move, but significant things happen as it slowly pushes in, and someone walks by and another person looks at them a certain way, and then a certain car comes through the shot, and there's key moments like that. So you would just draw a sequence of panels and describe, like we mentioned, like the numbering. Shot 1, A, B, C, D, E, for example, are the different key moments in that thing.
Right.
Or if the camera is, instead of doing a straight line, is going to do some sort of path or change, or is going to change direction as it moves around, you would have some sort of floor plan, draw the path that you expect the camera to go through, and then mark what are the key handful of moments that go in that thing, and then draw them out as their own panel.
Okay.
And it would be beneficial to show that floor plan with the boards. Keep it with them when you show people and say, this is the room, this is where we're going, and as we go through, this is what that shot looks like, and that's what that shot looks like.
Right, exactly. Cool. Well, I think that's all the time that we have today. We've talked so much about a lot of different things, but if you guys, any of you students, have any further questions for the future of anything you might think of, tomorrow that you want to ask Dan, you can contact him at his email address, and that is on the bottom of the screen. And following our program, there'll be a list of some suggestions for more information, and that'll be all regarding storyboards and all kinds of fun stuff like that. So I just want to say thank you to Dan for coming out and talking to us about storyboards. And also, we look forward to seeing you guys this Thursday at 5 o'clock for our meet and greet, televised, our graduating class, our first one on October 5th, I think.
Nice.
Yes. So thank you guys so much, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.